Despite its high firepower, the full armor Gundam still had several serious flaws, which is why, according to official sources, the machine was never built. But of course, the Federation didn't just want to give up on this concept, and so they set out to fix the flaws of the FA-78-1 with a second draft, the FA-78-2, better known as the Heavy Gundam, which is also known as that one Gundam wearing sunglasses because it's one of the few Gundams that Kunio Okawara decided not to draw with the standard dual Gundam eyes. Although, according to some sources, like the Master Archive book, it is more than just a stylistic choice, because these sunglasses are actually extra shielding for the standard eyes underneath, and when not necessary, they can slide up, revealing those standard eyes. And talking about the legendary Kunio Okawara, if you can get enough of his designs, and let's face it, you know you can't, then you might want to check out today's sponsor, Naraka Blade Point, a hero battle royale game that is focused on fast-paced melee combat. It does also have ranged weapons, which will come in very handy, but for the most part, you'll be whooshing around with your grappling hook and other kinds of crazy maneuvers to outmaneuver your enemies to then get close and personal with your blades. And from now on, you'll be able to do so in Kunio Okawara design style. As part of their newest collaboration, you'll be able to get Beam Saber inspired swords, which have some really fancy effects going for them, but the biggest deal is of course the Gundam inspired mech, which has now become available. Transform into it, soar into the skies, and claim victory with its mechanical wings and fiery feathers. And it's not even the only mech in the game either. I've been having a blast playing with Feria Shen. Also, did I mention that the game has extensive customization of every hero? And the custom can even be shared online. So what are you waiting for? Click the link in the description right now and try out Naraka Blade Point for free on all major platforms. And now, back to that other Okawara machine that we were talking about. Rather than designing another set of add-on parts, they designed a brand new unit from the ground up, and then simply incorporated all the elements they wanted into it. Not only would this save a lot of weight, but it also made the structure of the mobile suit a lot simpler. Something that would minimize potential problems and also made maintenance a lot easier. As a result, the armor could no longer be ditched, but now offered more protection for less weight. And this was especially true in the torso. Unlike the previous Gundams, the Heavy Gundam no longer had the core block system, which allowed for extra armor and fuel tanks to be installed instead. And it got a similar overhaul for the weapons. The missile launchers were removed. Instead of the 360mm rocket cannon, it got a beam cannon, and instead of the dedicated targeting sensor, it got a beam saber. And unlike the full armor's simplified holder, this beam saber was in a holder that could actually recharge it. As for where the targeting sensor went, it was incorporated into the head. Depending on the source then, it may or may not have kept the 60mm Vulcan guns. In the original illustrations, it doesn't seem to have them, but in some later depictions, it does have them. I couldn't find any explicit reason for why they might have been removed, but personally, I think it might have been the same reason as to why the Gym Sniper Custom no longer has them. The vibrations could potentially interfere with the high performance and sensitive hit sensors. For handheld equipment then, its most famous weapon was the frame launcher. This giant contraption would go over the Heavy Gundam's arms and consisted of a Gatling gun and a 4-tube missile launcher. Normally, it would use one of these on the right arm, but it could also dual wield them if need be. And in addition to the frame launcher, it could also still be outfitted with the standard RX-78 weaponry, the twin beam rifle of the full armor Gundam, or two more dedicated weapons, a new type of bazooka that was more accurate and had 20% more range than the Hyper Bazooka, and a new type of beam rifle that used an early version of the E-cap technology, which then gave the rifle 80% more ammo capacity. And if this still wasn't enough, the machine also had special latches on its forearms where extra equipment could be attached to. The most well-known piece of equipment is a foldable shield with spikes, but it also had options like a box beam saber. So far, so good. The Heavy Gundam still had a lot of firepower and armor, and it was made significantly lighter. But it was still pretty heavy, so the Federation engineers wanted something to compensate for this. Enter the Hervik Company with two solutions. They would develop stronger thrusters for the machine, and a dedicated aircraft to carry it into battle, the Guncarry. The Heavy Gundam would go into the main body of this thing for transportation, and while it was being transported, the beam cannon was still usable thanks to a port in the right side of the hull. It looks like the Guncarry also might have had its own weapons, being 4 Vulcan guns and 4 missile launchers, but this has never been officially confirmed. And what is also up for debate is whether or not it would have been able to carry the full armor Gundam. According to some sources, it would be able to, but according to others, it wouldn't. However, all of these developments led to the project being severely delayed, and by the time that they were making good progress, it was cancelled. By November UC 0079, Amuro Ray and his stock RX-78-2 were simply making short work of Zeon's heavy mobile suits and even their mobile armors, something that pulled the entire FSWS project into question, and further work on the Heavy Gundam, and presumably also the Guncarry, was halted. But this wouldn't be where the story ends. 8 months after the 1-year war, work resumed, and after 6 months, 3 or 4 units of the Heavy Gundam were produced. And it was also at this time that the machine was officially designated as the FA-78-2 Heavy Gundam. The units were tested out extensively, and even though one of them was lost during an atmospheric re-entry test, they performed just as expected. Which would then lead you to believe that this machine was adopted by the Federation. But this is not how things went. It was exactly because the Heavy Gundam was a successful assault mobile suit that the Federation rejected it. According to the Gundam Archives book, after the 1-year war, the Federation began to rapidly demilitarize, probably in an attempt to save money. And you can really see this with the mobile suits that they're using during 0083 and the Grips War. They're mostly upgraded 1-year war machines or stuff they got from Zeon. Something like the Heavy Gundam simply didn't fit with the Federation's line of thinking at the time. So no more units were produced, and it never saw widespread adoption. However, the units that were already produced supposedly did see some action. But of course, the Federation never officially commented on this. And so because of this, their actual combat deployments are shrouded in mystery, speculation, and urban legends, just as with the first full armor Gundam. So, let's go over some of the most common theories. First of all, it is often said that Colonel Den Berserk, a Spec Ops member, piloted a Heavy Gundam and used it to investigate Zeon's top-secret peasant project. But due to the highly confidential nature of both the operation and the man himself, nothing more is known about this. Next up then, in UC 0081, a full armor Gundam was supposedly involved in the so-called Agartha incident. A series of battles took place around the Agartha colony, which led to the colony's destruction. This event was largely covered up by the Federation, but supposed images of the battle and the Heavy Gundam were leaked onto the dark web. Then in UC-0082, another heavy Gundam was supposedly deployed by the Republic of Zeon's defense forces, but was destroyed by Zeon remnants. I can see why the Federation would also want to cover this up. And then finally in UC-0090, we get a new Heavy Gundam based on Heavy Gundam Unit 2, which was requested to be made by Chairman Gaup. Although it was based on the designs of the old machine, thanks to the connections of the Chairman, all of the parts were brand new and up to date, including parts that weren't even in mass production yet, and even a biosensor that was modified with Zeon technology. Because the Heavy Gundam didn't use the core block system, there was enough empty space left to install it. And to make a long story short, by using the brainwaves of a new type pilot, this system greatly enhances the tracking and responsiveness of the unit that it's installed in. And later on, this Heavy Gundam would also be further upgraded with funnels that are stored in the containers on the left side of the backpack. The downside of these containers, though, is that they can't recharge the funnels. And for even more firepower, it could also be used with the burst liner, which Chairman Gaup also somehow got his hands on. The unit was assigned to the Cyber New Type Ingrid 0, and was of course painted in her trademark Johnny Ryden color scheme. And so, despite being a quote-unquote old machine from the 1-year war, the Heavy Gundam was still able to perform very well. Oh, and another thing that this version of the Heavy Gundam had access to was an unmanned version of the Guncarry. Because it's unknown if any Guncarrys were built during either the 1-year war or during the time that the Heavy Gundams were being tested, it is also unknown if this is a brand new unit or not. Going back to UC-0083 then, the Federation was getting worried about the movements of Axis, and therefore in March, they requested the Army to develop a Gundam-type transforming mobile suit that could go and check things out over there. Another goal of this project was to be a showcase for the Federation civilians. 1 month later then, development of this new machine began at the California base, and they opted to use the blueprints of the Heavy Gundam as a base to save on development time. The transformation was kept relatively simple, and 2 powerful thermonuclear rocket engines were installed on the legs as the machine's main engines. While these did perform well in their intended task, they did have a serious impact on the machine's ground performance though. A lot of the leg's internal space was now taken up by things for these thrusters, severely hampering even basic things like walking. If the terrain wasn't flat, it had to hover instead. It was completed in August of UC-0084 and was named the Shuttle Gundam. And it did succeed in its mission. In November, it took off from the California base, left the atmosphere, and returned. And it even transformed as intended. And in addition to this, there were even plans to outfit it with optional packs like a high mobility version for space. But again, despite seeming very promising, after its maiden flight, there are no further records of any other flights. So it seems like the machine never got to carry out its intended mission of scouting Axis. Rumor has it that the engine was FUBAR, and that because of this, it was stored in the Kennedy Spaceport Museum, where it would then be confiscated by the Titans to gather info for the development of the Gundam Mark II. The final Heavy Gundam variant then is the Gunner Gundam. The original story is that after the 1-year war, the Federation's Weapons Development Bureau received a request to develop a mid-range support mobile suit with powerful targeting sensors based on the RX-78-2. But the machine also needed to maintain the high versatility and mobility that made it so powerful in the first place. and the people from the Federation's Weapons Development Bureau immediately thought the same thing that you're probably thinking right now. This sounds extremely similar to a machine that we already have, minus the supercharged targeting sensors. So, taking the data from the Full Armor Gundam and the Heavy Gundam, they set out to develop a sniper version of the RX-78. For the body, they mainly took inspiration from the Heavy Gundam and went with integrated armor parts to save on weight. For the sensor then, they looked to the Full Armor Gundam. On the right side of the backpack, it received a similar targeting sensor, while on the left side, it got a brand new sensor pod, which was filled to the brim with state-of-the-art electronic warfare equipment. Not only did they perform well under heavy Minovsky interference, but they could also jam enemies. All of these sensors, though, supposedly also generated such powerful electromagnetic waves that they could also damage the main cameras of the Gundam. So as a countermeasure, it got goggle-style shielding, which could be closed when the sensors were active. And finally for the weapons, it came with 2 head-mounted 60mm Vulcan guns, 2 beam sabers, which are now stored in the calves because there was no more room on the backpack, and a specialized beam rifle that combined Federation and Xeon technology. By linking with the composite sensor on the right side of the head, it was more accurate than the main gun of a cruiser, and it has an output that is 30% higher than that of a standard beam rifle. Nothing is said about its range, but I think it's safe to assume that this was greater as well. The machine wasn't named the RX-78 SP Gunner Gundam for nothing. The Master Archive book then also speculates that it might have had missiles on its knees and the right side of the shoulder, because the armor there looks very similar to that of the Full Armor Gundams. But even without those, the Gunner Gundam was hitting all of its goals. And in June of UC 0080, a mock-up was created using a GIM. But again, this was where the machine would end. Despite its great potential, it was determined that the machine was functionally too similar to the Mudrock Gundam, and the machine was quietly forgotten about. Later on then, rumors surfaced that called the Gunner Gundam's development timeline into question. Rather than being requested after the 1-year war, when we go by this rumor, some development might have already been happening during the 1-year war, because a variant of the Gunner Gundam supposedly appeared in it. This unit was called the Full Armor Gunner Gundam, and could have potentially been an earlier version of the concept or some kind of trial version. Because rather than being a completely new unit with integrated armor like the Gunner Gundam and the Heavy Gundam, it uses removable armor to turn a stock RX-78 unit into something that closely resembles the Gunner Gundam. As a result, the unit is more chunky, and again looks more like the Full Armor Gundam than the Heavy Gundam, but keeps the Gunner Gundam's main features. The only real differences are that it's got some more weapons. It uses a shield, 2 E2 beam spray guns, which are stored on the calves, and a giant beam rifle, because why not? And then as promised in my last video, let's go over one of the original plans for the FSWS project that didn't get approved. Allegedly. The PF-78-1 Perfect Gundam is a machine that the Federation officially denies ever existed. I wonder why, but it was included in documents that were supposedly leaked from a Federation database, which then of course led to a lot of speculation. But even with this, the most accepted theories are that this thing was at most a simulator-only machine, which was scrapped shortly after it was conceived. And rumor also has it that the Perfect Gundam was concocted by a different team than the one that designed the Full Armor and Heavy Gundams. Again, I wonder why. But that's not to say that the Perfect Gundam didn't have some good ideas. In theory. To solve the problem of the beam rifle's limited ammo, they took a slightly different approach. They still made a double-barreled beam rifle, but rather than making the barrels exchangeable, they hooked them up to an extra generator that was stored on the back. This generator isn't also hooked up to the shoulder-mounted cannon, which according to most rumors is a 360mm rocket cannon, just like the full armor Gundam, but there are also rumors that it is a massive beam cannon. I prefer this theory because why else would it be connected to the generator? Its other weapons then are two head-mounted 60mm Vulcan guns and a shield that has 4 drop mines and 3 beam sabers. And to compensate for all of this bulk, it got a plethora of extra thrusters that, according to the leaked data, totally did make up for its lost mobility. The veracity of these claims is questionable, to put it lightly, as the technology required to make all of this work as intended wasn't even close to available in UC 0079. But if you want to get into even crazier rumors, there's also one about a supposed support craft that definitely wasn't cooked up by the marketing department of a toy company. Meanwhile, over in the Thunderbolt version of the Universal Century then, the Perfect Gundam was made, but had a completely different backstory. To make another long story very short, Daryl and Io have their final showdown, during which both of their machines get heavily damaged. The Zaku 2 high mobility type reuse P device and the full armor Gundam respectively. Zeon got the Gundam, and the Zaku is stolen by a new type monk who wants to rebuild it. Don't ask too many questions. Daryl is eventually reunited with his Zaku on Earth, and a little while later, he gets a new mission. Infiltrate Luna 2. There's only one problem. Two, kinda. The patched up Zaku is only good for use on the ground, and well, it's a Zaku. It's not exactly going to blend in with the Federation's mobile suits. So, they get a genius idea. By combining the frame of the Zaku with the armor parts of the full armor Gundam and its head, they create the Perfect Gundam. Not only does this thing resemble the famous RX-78-2, which will allow Daryl to easily slip into Luna 2 airspace, but the conversion also increases the Zaku's performance. The Perfect Gundam's armor is 3 times as durable, its thrust is increased by 150%, and its leg thrusters are stronger by 30%. Plus, since it still had the reuse P device, it was significantly more reactive and maneuverable than Federation mobile suits. Truly a mobile suit worthy of the Perfect moniker. I'm sure many pilots would give an arm and a leg to pilot this thing. But that's enough of the FSWS project for now. There are still a few more mobile suits that were developed as part of this project, but just as with the Heavy Gundam, I think it's best to talk about them in their own dedicated video. So don't forget to check out Naraka Blade Point with the link down below. As always, a big thank you to the Patreon supporters. I hope everyone watching has a great day, and I'll see you all next time.